The Supreme Court is set to decide the limits on Biden's vaccine mandates, as critics say his unconstitutional rules will devastate healthcare workers and businesses across the nation. Let's bring in Judicial Crisis Network President Carrie Severino, along with Job Creators Network Chief Communications Officer Elaine Parker. Ladies, thank you for being with us this morning. Carrie, I'd love to start with you. You heard the oral arguments yesterday. To the best that oral arguments can point you in the right direction, where do you think the Supreme Court is leaning on these mandates?
Yeah, so with respect to the OSHA mandate that says you have to have a vaccine or test if you have a business of over 100 employees, the court seemed very skeptical. OSHA is supposed to regulate just job-related things like wearing a hard hat at a construction site or a ventilator if you're working with powdered substances. This is not what this is meant to be a national policy on a major epidemic. And the court was very skeptical that they were going way beyond the authority they had. Did Congress really mean to give you this broad authority to regulate all of American businesses when some have higher risks and some have lower risks, et cetera? With respect to the healthcare workers mandate, it was a little harder to read, but there was definitely some of the same skepticism that, okay, look, there might be some instances where the situation merits it, but there's also the concerns on the other side of, is this going to be forcing employers, enforcing healthcare workers to get a vaccine in situations where they might not be at serious, creating as much of a serious risk? And also, is it still within that governmental authority? Because even if it's great policy, there's a question of who decides this policy. Should it be our unelected bureaucrats, or should it be Congress itself?
Right. Elaine, it's estimated that this would cost businesses nearly $1.3 billion to comply with the mandate. 45 million, that's the number of jobs potentially impacted. I'm curious, in your estimation, in your position, from the vantage point you've been able to acquire, I'm curious, how many businesses do you think have already complied with this? I wonder, as I watch these oral arguments, has the economy already moved ahead of the law? Anecdotally, I know a lot of corporations have already put these rules into place.
Well, thanks for having me, Will, first of all. Look, we represent small businesses, and our small businesses, the SBA defines a small business as any company under 500. And so this mandate impacts companies that have over 100 employees. And when you think about how many companies that impacts, that's a huge swath of our small business community. There's 30 million of them in the country. And this mandate initially had a stay put against it, and then the stay was lifted. And yet the administration continued saying that they were moving forward with the date, and they were continuing to pursue a January time frame to get this implemented, even when the stay was in place. And we really felt that that was bullying the country and our small businesses. They are going to be severely impacted at a time when they can least afford it. They're facing major inflation, supply chain crisis, and labor shortages that we haven't seen in our lifetime. And then they were faced with being bullying and implementing all of these processes and policing their employees on something that they shouldn't have been part of. It's not a question of whether or not we should do something about COVID or how serious it is. It's who has the authority. And the fact is, it's the states and our congressional representatives.
No doubt, Elaine. And I want to return to the legal argument in just one moment. But quickly, as a follow-up there, and you make a great point, there's 30 million businesses between 100 and 500 employees, and those are the ones that you're focused on. I'm just curious, and I don't know what percentage of those have already implemented, requirements that would at least shadow what the Biden administration is asking. I'm just curious, why? If they're not mandated yet, why is it liability that many companies are concerned with? Why have many companies already begun to institute these types of requirements on their workers?
Well, look, the larger companies, it's not a big cost to them. It's not a big issue. They can take a few people in a department or dedicate a whole department to tracking and setting up processes. But for our companies that have 100 to maybe 105 or 130 employees, those employees, we estimate anywhere between 15 and 30% of those employees do not want to get vaccinated for whatever the reason. And we're not an anti-vax position. That's not what this is about. This is about a labor shortage and the science that that doesn't support whether you have 99 employees and the mandate doesn't affect you, and you have 100 and you hit the mandate, and you've got to implement all of these processes and police your employees on something, on a decision that should be made between you and your doctor in the exam room, but not you and your boss in the lunchroom.
It's a great point, Elaine, and it's really good to reemphasize over and over the difference between big corporations and these 100 to 500 level employees and the impact. Really quickly, Carrie, I have 30 seconds left. What do we make of Justice Sotomayor? How can she be so misinformed?
Well, you know, unfortunately, I think we were seeing some of the comments coming out. She famously now said there were like 100,000 kids in the hospital, maybe a lot of them on ventilators. That's more than there have been hospitalized for the entire duration of the pandemic. Unfortunately, I think we saw a lot of the justices arguing from what they thought was the good policy, like, oh, this is a really big emergency, so we should be allowing OSHA to regulate it, rather than thinking about the real legal question, which is, okay, even if you think this is great policy, even if you think it's necessary, does OSHA really have the authority for it? And unfortunately, that's the reason justices shouldn't be second guessing this. It should be Congress, because they have access to those facts in ways that the justices obviously don't, because Justice Sotomayor got it very wrong yesterday.
I got to run. But I think it's clear, exaggerating the facts to extend the emergency powers, or attempt to extend emergency powers. Carrie, Elaine, great to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much.